Everyone, it's great to be here, and just for the dads who feel a little left out, you are Papa. You are Papa Bears. So Mama and Papa Bears, rise up. We need to protect our children. So I'm going to be talking tonight, and if you want to start the presentation, Dave, and I didn't mention this to you, but I don't have a clicker, I don't think, so you're going to have to go.
I'll be your flicker.
Okay, I'll go now. So we're going to talk about, well, let me preface this a little bit. Last week, there was a drag show at the Foundry, the new restaurant in Durham. And it was at noon hour, midweek at noon hour. And I understood later that it was in a back room. But I know that a lot of people sent letters, and this was supposedly for adults, but there's nothing to keep children out of, parents bring their children, right? And I was talking, we were at an event yesterday, and actually my husband was talking to a young woman, and she said, well, I just don't see any problem with it. Like, they're just entertaining. Well, let me tell you, there's a huge problem. And so my question is, okay, I'm not sure why they wouldn't have needed a license to do that, number one. Number two is it going to be strippers next time? The deviancy will continue, and it will worsen as long as we remain silent. So I'm going to talk about a few things tonight. I'm going to talk about drag queens, but I want to go back and talk about some history because I think it's important that you understand where this new movement came from, because it's not new. So we're going to start, we're going to talk about what's, the cultural shift, which has been going on for decades. But it's, I like this, mustard seed. That must be Pastor Dennis's sermon illustration from yesterday. We'll just put that right up there. Faith is a mustard seed. That's a good illustration. So, the cultural shift has redefined sexuality. And that's nothing new. You know that. I'm sure you're aware of that. But it's got deep roots. And the ramifications are far-reaching, especially when it comes to our children. And I would assume that most of you here are concerned about what's happening in the education system with our children, which gets worse. I tell you, every few months I think I've heard it all, and then it's something else. And you think it can't get any worse. It will keep getting worse until we take action. So we're going to talk about drag, but I also want to talk about the rise of queer theory, because I find that that's an issue that isn't well understood, and I can't go into I have a whole paper on this, but it's just this is just like a 25-minute talk, and we could talk for hours on queer theory alone. So queer theory and the emergence of drag have kind of meshed together, and you're going to see and understand why in a few minutes. So if you want to go ahead, we're going to talk, there's some historical roots. So this is the roots of drag, and it comes out of LGBTQ activism in the 70s. So drag, now there's been men dress in women's clothing since Shakespeare, or before perhaps, It was an acting, like they would act as women, often because there wasn't women to actually play the parts. But this is different. This isn't about, kind of just doing pretending to be like a normal woman. So drag activism started in the early 20th century, early 1900s, and then progressed. And in 2009, how many of you have heard of RuPaul? Anybody heard of RuPaul?
Yeah.
It's disgusting, isn't it? Yeah. So his drag race started in 2009. But before that, we had the 1959 Cooper donut riot. Now, that riot, I had to Google it because I wasn't familiar with it, and what I found was that they're not even sure it happened. But it was an LGBT activism riot, if it did actually happen. They can't find the actual reports. It's a really strange thing. And drag queens were apparently part of that activism. That was back in 1959. 1969, 10 years later, the Stonewall riots, and most of you have heard of the Stonewall riots. Now, let's remember that there were a percentage of homosexuals who were actually victimized. And I'm not about to say that that never happened, because that wouldn't be true. But the reality is that what's happened is, out of those riots came a momentum. And that momentum then became a momentum of gaining acceptance. So let's go to the next slide. The mainstream acceptance of drag, and that kind of started, I've kind of already covered that with RuPaul, but from RuPaul it goes to, where we are today. And you can choose to shut off the television, but your children can't shut off story time at libraries and in their schools if these drag queens show up. And at libraries, the parents taking their children to these things, we need to somehow educate those parents. And so we need younger people and grandparents to find out what their own kids are doing. If your kids are endorsing this, then you need to have some serious conversations. And that's not easy, because what we find now, of course, is there's been so much of the queer theory, which I'll talk about in a minute, that has infiltrated into academia and into the culture since the mid-'80s, that our children, their minds are not clear on these things. They have embraced queer theory at a deep level, even if they don't even understand it. And so we're up against a battle. I want to go ahead. I'm going to talk about the LGBTQ manifesto, because out of the 1969 Stonewall riots, there came a group of LGBT activists, mostly LG and B activists. Trans was very minimal in those days, like 0.014%. And that was up until 2013, actually, and it was called transsexual, not transgender. Transgender is not a medical term, it's a political term, and there really isn't such a thing as a transgender child. I'll be able to watch it, I'll be into the trans stuff in a minute, so I better be careful. But what we need to understand is there was a manifesto printed in 1979, I think again in 1987, it was added to. And it was presented actually to the government in the US and kind of endorsed. It was part of a presentation. So let me tell you what they did, and this is in Closing the Floodgates, the book I did on gender and sexuality. So I have the whole manifesto in there, and it's worth a read, let me tell you. Because if you don't know what that is about, it's really important for you to find out. So here are the highlights. Number one, they had a program of desensitization. They wanted to desensitize the general public. So what does that mean? They wanted to increase the presence of LGBTQ people, and they wanted to increase the conversation. And one of the things that they said is, the more you talk about this, the more acceptable it becomes. So we keep talking, and we keep talking, and we keep talking, and we normalize it. So the desensitization, they had media influence. They were going to use Hollywood as a weapon. What do you think?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, they had used it very strategically. And to the point, and this is the saddest thing, and I talk about this in my book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us, that Hollywood has become one of the hubs of pedophilia, right? It has become the source of child abuse, young actors, actresses coming in that are habitually abused, and many have started to talk out about this kind of stuff. So Hollywood's so corrupt, and we know that, and we're seeing some pretty awesome things happening. People pulling out of the Hollywood scene to start doing films and movies that are family oriented. It's pretty exciting. To me, I'm going to give you the bad news, but I want you to remember there's some good news happening. More and more people are waking up. Compared to when Tanya was talking about 5 years ago, and I was thinking about that, and I know Tanya quite well, and we were talking at her place in Surrey a couple of years ago, and when I started the activism part of my life, which I never planned on doing, it wasn't in my script, I'm sorry. I was like quite happy to be a therapist and even write. I liked writing, but anyways, God kind of lit a fire and got me out of my comfort zone. But that was in 2016, and so that's 8 years ago, and we're looking at the stuff that's happened. And in the last 2 years, I began to see glimmers of hope, because in 2016 you all weren't here. Many of you were like I was for many years, and able to kind of go through life and think everything's fine. My children went to public high school. Oh my goodness. Now I think, oh dear Lord, what did I do? And a whole lot of other things. So it's not about judging people, but to recognize that the movement is growing. And Tanya's Action for Canada, bless her, is really growing. So media influence, victim narrative. Where do you hear that now? Victim narrative. The LGBTQ, right? The trans particularly. Oh, and by the way, the Born That Way narrative came out in about 1973 when homosexuality was removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, so it was no longer a mental illness. And part of the reason for that is because the Born That Way rhetoric had gained so much momentum. And I want you to know that there is no verifiable scientific evidence that shows that there is a gene connected with homosexuality. So throw that out the window. That is part of this whole media influence and how it's been skewed and how they have used big pharma and research, paid off research that will support their biases. So victim narratives are very strong within the LGBTQ. What we're seeing now, of course, is the cross-sex identifying child, the trans child, that is the victim, as well as homosexuals, lesbians, bisexual, and queer. The next one, and you're seeing it already, and certainly in academia, it's very present, the next victim narrative is pedophilia, and it's raising its ugly head in a big way. And I want you to know that pedophilia was on the outer edges of LGBTQ activism right from the beginning, just as drag was. So this isn't to say that every pedophile is homosexual. So hear me clearly, it's not. But there is a deviant side with LGBTQ activism that embraces every kind of sexual expression, including pedophilia. And that's what is being taught. Not pedophilia, it's not under that. You won't hear that word in our schools, but everything under the sun is okay for your children. Every kind of sexual behavior, which is exactly what was going on, what they wanted to do in the positive portrayal of all kinds of sexuality. This is back in 1979. So this has been going on for a little while. If you want to go ahead, the next is the vilification. I think it is. Vilification strategy. I wonder if I've got this out of order. Anyways, I'll keep going with what I have in notes and you read what's there. You can do both at the same time, because I'm gonna cover it all. So vilification. So this is the shaming strategy. And how many of your churches, because I think most of you probably have a church affiliation of some kind, the churches were shamed. You know, homophobic, transphobic, you don't know what you're talking about, the Bible is just, it's just a storybook, all of those kind of things, and the reinterpretation of Sodom and Gomorrah, all of those kind of things. And the church has been wrong all these years, you're a bunch of nincompoops, whatever you want to call it, and you're outdated. It's like you're just the outdated and antiquated backwaters. That's what the church is. And so it was a shaming strategy to shut the voice of morality, because the church is actually to speak moral purpose, sexual purpose, biblical sound sexuality into the culture, not the opposite way around. And the church shut down. I'm talking by and large. The church kind of caved, went, well, we don't want to cross any bridges like that. We don't want to offend. That came later, that whole idea of offending people. But, back in 1988, the United Church embraced homosexual marriage. That was the first step down that road. So, shaming techniques, replacing pride of traditional views, pride of your family, and I'm talking about being proud in a good way, that you're happy with your family and you're so excited to raise your children. That kind of pride in doing what God has called you to do and to be a family, those kind of feelings, the love for your family, were seen kind of with this element of guilt, that you were guilty of something, you had no idea what, just because you weren't accepting this other whole segment of society into your bedroom, basically. So, I talked about media. Just watching my time here, Bonnie.
Okay.
So the advertising strategy, that was really to get the networks to push LGBT content. And so this goes back decades. Remember Friends and Seinfeld and all kinds of other shows? There were it was subtle back then, subtle innuendos of homosexual relationships or lesbian relationships, but it was starting. And then it increased, and they wanted to bring this level of normalization to the public, into the community, and into your churches. So the core was that, funding. That's a huge thing. The funding, where's all this funding come from? Billionaires. And you've probably heard that before, but when you think about this, most homosexual men never marry. Some of them are extremely successful in business and other areas, and they have lots of disposable income, and they know where to get it, and they know where to funnel it. So there's a lot of money here. So they wanted to, through media access, have backroom liaisons and gain support with the media outlets, which has happened universally, but particularly in the West. It's just been prolific. So then we have, if you want to go ahead, the infiltration, of course. I think we can go ahead, into mainstream acceptance, and then you get into this place where now we have it in the education. And that's been trickling down for the last 30 years. So nothing new. And you're saying, well, how is this about drag? I'll get to it. Because you need to understand that all of this was set in place by the same people, the drag queens way back then, and activists, LGBTQ activists. So it's all been to begin to start paving new roads of sexuality. So recently, I'm going to get you to go ahead again. Yes, here we have queer theory. So this is what I want to just touch on. So
You're okay till about 8 o'clock, Ann.
what's that?
You can go to about 8 o'clock. You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Queer theory kind of came into being in the early 1980s. Judith Butler and Michelle Fouché, they together developed this theory. We have these theories. It's like you have evolution theory, you have queer theory. Their mandate was to challenge the traditional view of living, basically, but particularly traditional views of sexuality. So see, you have the LGBT activist movement, you have drag queens, you have queer theory, and queer theory actually provides a meta theory that all this other stuff fits into very, very well. So it's like these people, and I would say there's an evilness here that has kind of got into the hearts and minds of some of these people. And so they introduced fluidity, sexual fluidity. What they began to talk about is that we're not male and female, we're not just simply, these people, we're so much more than male and female, and they began to intertwine the whole idea of gender, which is like, it's so ambivalent because we really don't have a really great definition of what gender is, other than there are 100 and some now genders. You pick choose your one. That means it's whoever you say you are, whatever you say you are. So it really doesn't have, it's very liquid, kind of like the sexual fluidity. But what Judith Butler was intent on doing was turning everything normal upside down. And it's taken these decades to get to the point where that's literally what's happened. And you look around you, and things that once would have seemed common sense and just normal life are no longer embraced like that. Everything is questioned. And so normativity is now abnormal. Having a male-female marriage and a family, well, that's abnormal. And gender theory really wants to turn everything on its head, question everything. And so as that's crept into our school and now is flooding our schools, that is what is really turning the children's minds into this confused state, because they're taught to question the very sense of who they are. Can you imagine? Like, we didn't have to go through that. I can't even begin to imagine what these children are experiencing every single day. Now, not every teacher in our education system is pushing this, but as the older teachers age out and retire, and they're getting sick of it, quite honestly, you can't blame them, and younger ones coming out of university who have been seeped in this gender theory come into our schools, it is so prolific. And I mean, I've said this before here, that we need to keep our kids out of the public school system, whatever we can do and however that works. And I know that's very difficult for a lot of people, but somehow we've got to get the children, it's like saving their souls, quite honestly, to get them out.
I'll second that.
Yeah, we have to do that. So, and I know that there's some things happening in the communities around. So Judith Butler she really had a mandate to turn everything upside down, calling good evil and evil good. And that's basically what's happened, and that's what is happening in our society. And this young woman yesterday is exactly what she said. Well, there's nothing wrong with these drag queens. Why is there such a problem? Well, number one, I mean, if they started doing their entertainment in gay bars, and that was okay for decades. It wasn't what we would want our children to be involved in, but you know what? When they become adults, we don't get to choose, right? And then it came mainstream. And now it's almost happening in every small town. There's a real target in small towns. Do you know why? Because if you can turn the normal populace, because the cities have already caved to so much of this deviancy, many within the cities, but what there is this push for is to really turn the hearts and minds of the people who have been the bedrock of our society and get a hold of their minds and change it. Now, they know they're not going to change your minds very much, for the most part, although it's interesting to see how many older people go, oh, well, live and live, it's fine. Yeah, well, I'll take it back to the gay bars if it's fine. Leave it there. Why do they need to be entertaining in our restaurants in Durham? Hello? And, public libraries, Meaford, we were at we protested there, I think there were about 6 of us last year. I mean, people don't come out. They don't come out because they don't understand how deviant this is and how it is structured to change the minds of our kids, change their brains, literally. And of course the young parents are sold out to this queer theory, so they're taking their kids. Anyways, let me go ahead with a little more. So queer theory, just taking everything normal, and I've already talked about that, see I do this all the time, and turning it upside down. So, origin of queer theory permeates the university. So teachers, especially in the humanities and literary arts, our teachers are coming out steeped in queer theory, and then education is filtering into the school curricula. So that goes along. The queer theory and Marxism are very intertwined as well. I'm not going to get into Marxism tonight, but it just all flows together in such a very, well, I would say, overusing the word deviant, but it's a deviancy throughout the whole movement. And the movements have come together now, and we're seeing the results. Pop culture, media and entertainment, and then of course religious institutions. So let me go back, go ahead to the next one, because I've talked about that. We'll keep going.
I didn't see the bottom line,
Oh, go back if you need it, yeah.
religious institution.
Challenging traditional religious views.
Mhm. So, one of the things that's, and I don't know if you've been aware of this, but recently, I mean, within the last year, Andy Stanley, do any of you watch Andy Stanley? No? He's certainly a very high profile pastor, evangelical pastor, who has embraced concepts of queer theory and certainly the LGBTQ. It's really, the whole movement is changing the direction, not only of mainline churches, I'm not sure what that is, not only of mainline churches, but also of evangelical churches that are now caving more and more, which is very hard. If you keep your questions to the end, then we'll just write them down and we'll take questions at the end if that's okay. So Yeah, lots of worries, lots of concerns over what's happening in the schools. I've seen more and more parents, and I think you are too, starting to voice some of the stuff. Let's go ahead. So this is interesting. In 2023 Gallup poll, what they found was 7.6% of adults. So keep this in mind, 7.6% of adults now identify as LGBTQ. And you're thinking, well, that's not that much. Well, when you consider up until 2014, it was 1 to 3% of adults. That's a huge, and it had been stable from the time they started doing the surveys and the stats on that community up until about 2014. It was stable. It never grew. And now, of course, with the queer theory, with LGBTQ activism, all these decades now we're seeing a huge, huge change. And you think, well, 7.6%, that's not much, but look at it. It's on the next slide, Dave. So here's what's happening to Gen Z. So that's from 1999. Babies born in 1999 to 2012, I think, is Gen Z. And 53%, wait a minute, I've got that wrong, I'm reading the wrong one. Let me see what I have with that. 28%, sorry. 28.5% of Gen Z, so we have 7.6% of the adult population that now identifies LGBTQ, but 28.5% of Gen Z. So that's over a quarter of this young population that are identifying at some level as LGBTQ. But about 85% of those, most of those are girls, 85%, I'm messing up the stats, sorry, is 50, what does that say, 57%, claim they're bisexual. And that's happening in elementary school as well, because the need to identify, the pressure to identify is so strong. So how is so much easier for young children and then young adults to say, well, I'm bisexual. Gets them out of the, I'm not, interested in men, I'm not interested in women, I'm interested in both. So we get to that, and then, we have transgender, which is now up to 1/8 of all LGBTQ and adults. It's just exploding, and it's on our watch, which makes it very difficult. Let's go to the drags. Oh, there's the other one. Because my notes don't have my PowerPoint slides in, sorry. The role of drag now, way back in the 50s, now we're in 2024. So there's a mainstream march to bring drag right into your neighborhood, to your fall fairs, to your community events. And take a quick guess on who's funding it.
Government.
The government, Trudeau government, keeps allocating millions toward LGBTQ activities, and specifically funding these drag queens. And they also fund the Get Real movement. Remember last year we had a little to-do in our area. I'm from Dundalk, so we had Get Real come to our schools. And so these people have no educational training, they have nothing like that. They just come and talk about their gay, lesbian, or bisexual and trans experiences to our kids. And it's all to open the door. And so drag just flows in right behind it. And these men are, what they're doing is they're showing hypersexualized behavior. Very hypersexualized. It's a parody of women, of womanhood, of motherhood. How many of you have ever, a lot of women here, how many of you have ever dressed like that? Yeah.
Oh, come on, give us some credit.
Maybe
That's Disney.
something on Broadway. Actually, those ones are pretty tame. But you know, this is not typical expression of womanhood. And so it becomes this mockery and a further eroding of women, which we're seeing happening right across the board, of course, with the cross-sex group that men want into women's spaces, which they're literally getting placed. Here you go, the door's wide open. So not much wonder that drag is right there on the heels of it. We have to really question the narrative that's been pushed on us, and we need to do more than question it. So the queering of religious teaching, so I'm using that word because that's exactly what queer theory, drag, LGBTQ, all of that is pushing, is to queer, to turn upside down religious teaching, to take biblical scriptures out of context, out of traditional revelation, and to change the hearts and minds of the populace. They want to see a conflict in doctrine, in doctrinal truth, and so few churches are really preaching on biblical sexuality. We really need more teaching on biblical sexuality. We need more teaching from the pulpit on the horrors of abortion, because that's all wrapped up, because it is good to kill babies. Queer theory brings in this whole element. You're not killing babies. They're not human, right? Everything upside down. Remember what you would have thought, 50 years ago. You wouldn't have thought you would see the murder of thousands of babies in Canada, and the other end of the scale, euthanasia, right? It's about the annihilation, total annihilation of humanity, in one sense. So, let me go ahead, Dave. There's some issues with drag that I think, I'm preaching to the choir here, but that we need to realize it really is an attempt to rob innocence from our children, especially drag in libraries, where children, these should be safe places for young children. And I mean, this is drag, story time is aimed at little children. I mean, I'm talking 3-year-olds, preschool children. How many of you men like to sit and read to a group of children all afternoon? It's not a guy thing. Hello? Even women don't like to read all afternoon to children. It gets a little much. But because everything that is masculine is under a microscope, and of course it's toxic if you're masculine, but let's face it, normal men don't want to sit. Number one, they don't want to dress and drag, really. There's a whole sexualized thing about drag, that it is a sexual experience for most of these men. And then you have them in front of little children. So, parents, give your head a shake. Don't take your children. If we could get parents to stop taking their children, this would stop. But what we're seeing actually is more parents, because they go home and they talk, oh, that was so much fun, little Johnny loved it. Let me tell you, some of the looks on some of the kids, and what we need to see, what we really have to do is have parents infiltrate, which is very hard because you have to have a child. Usually a parent, an adult cannot go to these the drag queen leg story hours. An adult is not allowed in to watch this unless they have a small child with them. So you're stuck, because who wants to expose their child to that? Except parents that are doing it and are likely not going to report on it. We need somehow to get ahead of that. I'm not sure I have any answers for that, so if you do, that would be great. And it's 8 o'clock, so we have to keep moving. We need to question, rather blindly accept, and that's why you're here, because all of you are questioning what's going on. And age-appropriate content. Well, nothing in drag is age-appropriate. Think gay bar scenes. There's not much that is more deviant than gay bars. And that's what we're bringing to our children. Go ahead. I've talked about this, so we need to keep going, yeah. Yes, so we have traditional churches, LGBT affirming churches, and a conflict between the two of them. We can go ahead. The impact on your family. None of your families are actually immune to queer theory. And remember that these are people that have simply, young people, who have just simply been taught over and over and over again that this is truth. So it's not like we want to, bang them over the head, but somehow we need to get to their hearts. We need to be able to explain and show them what's really underlying all this and how we can work together to slow this momentum. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about, I've got a slide at the end, I'll keep going.
You can keep talking, and it just means the question period will be less, that's all.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
So the public visibility with drag is they want attention, and we want to limit that. So however we can do that, I found out with the Foundry, the people who have invested in it aren't really the owners of the, they own the property, but they don't have much say over what's done at the restaurant and those kind of things. So, we need to be able to get to the bottom of who owns what, how do we attack this in a way that we can say, hey, we're not happy with this, we don't want this in our community, and then get it to the right people so we can shut some of this stuff down. Go ahead. We've talked about all this, so we'll just keep going. Drag performances. So here's the other thing, books. And most of you are probably familiar with what's happening with books in our school. Scholastic just brought out a new series of LGBT-friendly books for the public school for ages like kindergarten up for this year. Like it just doesn't stop. It's inundated on our kids. And so introducing queer concepts to children, and you see, look at all the smiles, it's all so fun. It's all so fun, until they're caught up in this. Right. Go ahead. I think we can skip that one too. We can just look for, okay, call to action. We need to challenge the cultural shifts that have happened, and I think we're doing that. Action for Canada is one resource. Another coming up in September, and there's going to be a slide in a minute, is the Hands Off Our Kids March, the Million March for Children. So Pastor Dennis is going to host the Hanover one. There'll be one in Owen Sound as far as I know, and hopefully in Meaford again this year. And any other town hall where people choose just to gather and to just say, leave our kids alone, leave our kids alone. So that is gaining momentum. There's a lot of momentum coming. So the call to action also is in your elementary schools, that when you find out, to develop a relationship, and this is mostly for younger parents, with the principal, because it's the principal we understand, of course, unless there's a lot of passing the buck, which I still think there is, but principals decide who's gonna come into the school and who's not. And so if you can have some kind of relationship with the principal of your children's school and be able to speak truth to that person and say, look, we're really concerned, or better yet, to develop parent groups, PTA groups, infiltrate them, find out how you can begin to change the narrative in this education. So I think that that's pretty much it. Hands off our kids. This is a really good,
Very good.
will that come up?
I'm gonna just grab it.
So this is a really good place for some resources, just like Action for Canada has great resources. So check out their website and check Hands Off Our Kids website, resources. What's that saying? Yeah, so there's some things here, letters and templates to write, so you don't have to think on your own. You can kind of, here's some of the suggestions that you can write a letter to any teacher, school board, superintendent, whomever. But we need to do that. Advertising postage, you go down a little bit. There's some there's more coming. And then these are the locations so far, the locations that are going to have marches. These are the main ones. There'll be a lot more added before the 20th. Last year, literally, we barely had a website up. So we have a lot more momentum this year, and all of it is to help people like you with more resources, so that you can reach out to your neighbors, so that you can start talking to them about some of these things we've talked about tonight. So thank you, Dave. That's excellent. What else is there? Is that the last one that I gave you, Dave, or
Yeah,
was
that
it?
was it, yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you. This has been a very quick overview, but I'm going to turn it back.
No, we can do 20 minutes of questions and,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's good. What are you showing me?
I'm showing you a donation receipt.